Welcome to Response-Able Parenting, the podcast that shows you how to parent in alignment to your emotions, needs, and goals versus your programming, bad advice, and let's face it, outdated strategies that just don't work. You'll get in the trenches support on nervous system and emotional regulation, critical mindset shifts, stronger communication strategies, and more. In this podcast, you'll gain transformational tools that take you from reacting to every frustration to responding with clarity, regulation, and finally setting the example you desire for your kids. I'm Becky Jennings, your new parenting coach, and this is the Response-Able Parenting Podcast. Let's get into it. I cannot wait to introduce you to Catherine Hickem. Oh my gosh, did we just have the most incredible conversation? Catherine is a licensed clinical social worker. She's a seasoned psychotherapist. She's an executive coach. She has worked with thousands of families, and she really helps guide the parent to adult child relationship. Now, in this conversation, it's really, really cool because she specializes in parents of adult children. But what we talked about is even as parents who have younger children, who have elementary school, middle school, high school age children, how can we set ourselves up for success now so we never find ourselves in the position where our children do not feel like they can come to us and that we are the trusted space for them in their lives. I cannot wait for you to meet Catherine. We talk about her upcoming book, It's Never Too Late to Be a Great Parent. This is a wonderful conversation. This is probably an episode you could listen to over and over and over again. So without further ado, welcome, Catherine. Hello, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Response-Able Parenting. I love guest episodes because it brings such insight, such wisdom in an area that is not my expertise. And today we are talking to one of the greats. We're talking to Catherine Hickem, and she is going to, let's just say, maybe today, a lot of the future fears that you have about the relationship with your ADHD child, with your strong-willed child, and how we can go from an instant of feeling panicked and we future trip 15, 20 years down the road and we think,
Yep.
oh my gosh, if my child's acting like this now, what are they going to be like? What's our relationship going to be like? And Catherine is going to help us through that. And she's also going to talk to us about if you do have a adult child, how we can start to begin to repair that relationship. So Catherine, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited. And, I understand ADHD on so many levels as well as strong-willed. So this is a great place for me to be a part of. So thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So why don't you share where, how you got into this, like how this became your focus, and let's just dive in with some good questions.
Okay. So I had a practice, and first of all, I didn't think I was ever going to get to be a mom. So when I finally had the opportunity to become a mom, I adopted my son. I got pregnant when he was 5 months old. So then that meant I had 2 and 14 months.
Oh,
And so it was one of those feast or famine things, right? I had had the famine and now I have the feast, and like, wow. So as I start the journey, I have 2 very different type children. And my oldest is the one who has attributed to my white hair. And so, and so as I was being stretched and pulled and becoming translucent because of all the things that I was learning, I really began to pay attention to other parents. And I shifted my therapy practice as a psychotherapist over to parenting because I could see there were some significant gaps happening in the culture. And so for the next 15 years, I really just dove in and focused on what were the issues, the themes, and the patterns that I was seeing that I thought we needed to get addressed. Well, along the way, of course, I began to pay attention to, well, my kids are getting older. And so as I did that, I realized we have a problem. And here's a defining story, Becky. My daughter was home from college. One of her dear friends had come home to come to see her. And Tiffany leaves the room and he says to me, Mrs. Hickem, did you know that Tiffany is the only friend that I have who is the same in front of her parents as she is behind their back? And I said, no, Jason, I didn't know that. And I said, well, what about you? And he said, oh no, I'm not the same in front of them. And I said, well, can you tell me what that's about? He said, Miss Hickem, I learned a long time ago what they expect of me. And he said, when I go home, if I don't live up to those expectations, he said, my mother cries and my dad gets mad. So I've just figured out that when I go home, I become who they want me to be. And when I walk out the door, I go to being who I am. My heart broke because this was a really, really great young man. And I was very sad. And so I got really curious and I started talking to my kids' friends and I started talking to other young adults as they were coming into my lives. And it was true. They were living a lot of double lives. And as I started to really get to the root cause of that, it was, what's that about? And the core issue was expectations. Parents had been very clear about what they expected, what college they would go to, the kind of person that they would marry, the interests that they would have, the values that they would embrace, the politics that they would, and hold dear. And so what they did is they just created lives that were like two different worlds, right? I will let my parents in so they think everything's fine, and then I'll really do and be everything that I want to do and be.
Mm.
But there's ramifications to that, right? Because parents eventually figure out that they're living that separate life, but they don't understand why they're living the separate life. And then they start to double down, and then they start to get more controlling because they get more fearful. And so fear starts to drive this cycle that only pushes them further and further away.
Oh
And
my
parents go,
God.
what am I doing? Does that make sense to you? Right? It's like it totally connected the dots for me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we have to do something about it, because if I'm looking at our culture today in the United States, I see we do not know how to have conversations in a manner that is kind, respectful, that will allow for differences without people taking it personally, without people being offended, without people becoming hostile and angry. And at the end of the day, Becky, what I know about people being, angry is that what's really behind it is fear.
Yes.
Fear drives every decision that we make that's bad. And
Oh, yeah.
every ounce of hostility, every ounce of anger, there's something inside of us that got scared that we now have to protect, defend, whether it's a right, a belief, a value, a person, whatever it is. And we now have families who cannot talk to each other. They don't know how to talk to each other. So
Yeah.
in not being able to talk to each other, how do we problem solve? How do we deal with hard things? And so we now have a generation of young adults who struggle with resilience. And that's partly because the parents overprotected, didn't let them learn the hard way, didn't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now it has become the wall that divides because we don't know how to talk with each other.
Yeah, so many things that you just said, like my head's spinning because it's like, so many of us as ADHD parents, we experience the masking, our children are masking at school, right? They're keeping it all together at school. But then on the flip side, oh my gosh, are they masking in front of us because our expectations are to, and think about what that's doing to the nervous system of the child,
Right.
and like you talked about resilience. It's like they don't know which way is up and sideways. And as they're developing, it's like, wait, I have to perform like this, but that's so counterintuitive to my, what my desires, my impulses, my creativity, any of that. And then coming home, the expectations, you hit upon expectations. And I'd love to dive a little bit further into that
Yep.
because, yes, we have expectations. I think in how I embody expectations, it's like, the values of like kindness and safety. Like I have the expectation that we can trust each other, those are kind of
Hmm.
my expectations. And like for instance, we were talking about like being a good teammate on, and like what does it look like to be a good baseball teammate. And my son, he's very motivated by the gear, right? He's like, I'll do the sports for the gear, which I like. I run marathons and half marathons for the shirts, like that's, I get it. But it's also, we were talking about it and I was like, you just want to be a reliable and dependable teammate. I'm not asking you to be like the all-star player. I'm not asking you to be, the best one on the team. You could even be the 10th best one on the team or
Right.
the 12th. I don't really care about your performance. What I care about is that you are showing up for your team. Like you're
Yep.
reliable, you're dependable. And that's on the field and that's in the dugout. And so my son really wants a baseball rolly backpack. And I get it. It's awesome. Everybody has one. And his currently is being held together by like carabiners, and it's a disaster. For sure he needs a new one. But we're talking, he's like, can I earn this by showing that I'm a good teammate? And he was epic on the field, showed up for his teammates, and that's uncommon. And then it all fell apart in the dugout. He wasn't the teammate that we expected in the dugout. And so, I said, we can try again the next time, but we're talking about off the field and on the field. So I don't know for him if the expectations weren't laid out clear enough of like,
Hmm.
because he had been struggling on the field. And so he did do what he was supposed to do on the field. And
Yep.
so I think in terms of expectations, like you mentioned, like having the same political views, having, these very specific things, and that I think will come as they're getting teenagers, as they're
Yep.
developing their sense of self. I'm wondering in terms of expectations of how you show up as a human, kind, being safe, thinking of others as well as thinking of yourself. But like, how can that conversation be shaped where the expectation isn't so unattainable that they feel like they have to perform something in front of us?
Well, this is about trust, right? And
Absolutely.
and this is about parents getting really clear on what unconditional love really looks like.
Yes.
Because what I can tell you from my therapy practice and from the research, that most adult children do not believe that they would be unconditionally loved if their parents knew their real lives.
That's heartbreaking.
And it is a fact. I mean, the Pew Research did a great study in 23 that shows that how much information adult children keep away from their parents. And it's because they don't want to take the risk of learning that they really are not loved unconditionally.
Mm.
So they don't tell them. But there's something inside of them that knows the parents well enough to know that whatever this issue is, it would be an issue in the relationship that would cause them to either reject them, to judge them, to compare them with another sibling, to lose trust with them, and to change the relationship forever. And they're not willing to take those risks because the price is too high.
Mm.
So
And I don't
therefore,
think they're even doing this on a conscious level. It's
no,
just like they've gotten enough of the feedback that they
yeah,
don't trust the situation. And so trust is not just us trusting that they can follow through, but they're trusting the environment that we're creating.
right. And I think what we don't understand as parents of adult children is that they have lived in our homes as hostages for 18 years. So therefore,
Yeah.
they know what we think. They know our biases. They know our opinions. They know when we've said something about someone's crazy kid and how could they be so stupid to do A or B or C. They've heard all of our commentary about other people's lives and don't remember
Oh yeah.
when they themselves are in the exact same place and said, well, if they wigged out over, the next door neighbor's son doing this, what would they do with me? And
Right.
they can create a story. It may not be true, but they pull together information, which is what we do, right? The brain it only wants to put a period at the end of the sentence. It doesn't have to be a true sentence. Just needs to be a sentence because that's the way the brain works. It just wants to lower anxiety so you come up with an answer. It does, even if it's a lie.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what parents fail to recognize is they have all those years of data collecting that is inside their DNA. So they don't forget those kind of things.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff doesn't go away just because they get older. But when they get their back against the wall or a problem arises, they will remember those kind of things.
Yeah.
So this is the reason why, parents developing some awareness of how their children are interpreting them and what kind of environment are we creating. I think you bring up a great point. What's the environment? Because it can't just be about performance, it has to be about the sense of safety. One of the things that I did in the earlier years when I was working on parenting under 18, what I noticed was that we had become a culture that focused on performance, achievement, and behavior.
Hmm.
And the reason that wasn't working, and I don't think it does work today, is because it's outward coming in. If we worked on heart, character, or faith, those are internal qualities, right? If we develop those areas of life, the other things take care of themselves. They will
Mm.
naturally want to achieve, they will naturally want to perform. But when we're not paying attention and we say your value is based upon your GPA or your ERA on the field, or your value is external to performance, that means we're not paying attention to the things of the heart and the
Mm,
soul.
yeah.
And that doesn't prepare a child to be ready for all the things that they're going to face in life moving forward.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer we need to pay attention to the inside and let the outside, join the inside. But instead of we've been doing it in reverse, which is one of the reasons I think we have some significant issues.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes back to the expectations that we have of our children. And a lot of time it's like we are still figuring out our own value as the parent, right? And a lot of that is in reflection to how our children are acting. So like we feel like our value goes up incrementally as our children perform, as our children behave, and it is a direct reflection on our goodness as a parent.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the character. You were talking about heart, character, soul. The character aspect of this, I think, it can get muddied quite quickly, especially in the ADHD strong willed realm, because there's so many behaviors that don't feel like they fall into the value of kindness or safety or trust, because
Hmm.
lying's a big part of self-preservation when their
Sure.
impulses kind of supersede what they know to happen, and then they're just trying to reel it back, and so there's so many opportunities for correction, and there's the behavior can so quickly feel like the child that the character does get called into question. Can you speak to how parents can, if there's a mindset shift or a mantra or a tool that we can peel back almost like that immediate reactivity of like, this is bad. This bad behavior needs to stop, because if this becomes a habit, this will be who they are. This will be their
Right.
character. Can I be super real with you and tell you a personal story? A few years back, my son, the whole reason why I do the job I do today, was having one of those fiery moments. He was talking back, demanding it be his way. He was refusing to listen to any of our solutions, and the moment was getting really intense. My husband looked at me and said, "Well, you know all the parenting stuff, fix this." I completely froze. All the scripts from the books I'd read, all the strategies from the podcasts I'd listened to completely disappeared from my brain in that moment. But based on the volume of challenges that we were having with our strong willed ADHD son, I knew I had to figure out a different way, because panicking in the moment and grasping at anything only to not follow through at all and end up yelling just wasn't working. From this experience, I developed a repeatable, easy to remember, and easy to follow system that literally works with every single triggering moment. I can attest to it because there are many in my life. Now I can show up the way I want. I can communicate in a way that actually resonates with my strong-willed child. If this sounds like a solution for what's happening in your home, take these next 2 steps. Number 1, watch the free training about my rewiring process in the show notes. And then number 2, book your free call. On that call, we will talk about what's happening in your home, and you will get a customized solution that works best for you. I assure you, this doesn't have to feel as hard day in and day out as it does. There is the solution, and I'm so excited to talk to you about it.
I think one of the challenges that we have is we forget, and we have a tendency sometimes when we're in the throes of this to relate to the child based upon behavior instead of who the child is.
Absolutely.
And so the behavior takes the forefront. And so the real challenge for us is to always be saying, who is this person that is sitting in front of me? And sometimes I will say to parents who are really struggling, I want you to find a picture of your child when you would just smile at them. Just smile.
Mhm.
They didn't have to earn it. You would just smile when you saw them coming. Whatever that age is of that child, I want you to get a picture and I want you to keep it in some key places. Put a copy in your purse, maybe a copy in your car, put one in the bathroom to remind you that the relationship trumps the behavior, that how you see them is incredibly important because they read us so very well and they make determinations about who they really are based upon how we show up with them.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
fact. So if I show up and I'm annoyed and I'm frustrated, and we all get that way whenever we're dealing with repeated issues over and over again, but we can't let that be the norm, and we can't let that be the way we end the day,
Yeah.
right?
Well, let's speak to that because I think every parent is just like, uh-huh, like that that's the norm. So, what's your go-to to like break that pattern? Yes, the pictures are so helpful, but like sometimes even in the moment you're like, "No, I want them to understand that this is not okay." Like you get to that point where you're like
Mhm.
the train's off the track. So, when we're in that and there's been a lot of repeated coding of no, I am bad based off how my parents are acting.
Mhm.
Maybe they're still in their middle school age.
Yeah.
Can that be turned around?
It can be. I think one of the challenges is that we have a tendency to be so busy that we don't step outside the structure of the routine, which I understand why we have it, to really let them be and de-escalate, and for us to de-escalate. And do we put practices in place that allow them to be able to breathe without the quote, without knowing they are going to be scrutinized, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Do we have the ability to pick and choose? Do we say to them, can you tell me like what's going on in your head right now? Because sometimes when they get all worked up, they don't know how to handle that regulation, right? And so the question is, how do we help them de-escalate as easily as possible? And then we can go back and visit the rule. Like, can we take care of who they are before we take care of what they're doing?
I love that. I
Does that
love
make
that.
relevant
Oh, yeah.
connect?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and also it's like that's that, every client that I work with, they say, no matter what, I want my child, if they're in the worst possible scenario, they're at a party, things have gone wrong. I want them to say, I can still call my parent, and even though I'll probably be in trouble, they're still the option versus I can't
Yeah.
call them. Like I'd get destroyed, And
Right.
so I think that that is what everybody on paper wants. And they definitely say out loud, that's what I want. I say out loud, that's what I want. And then when the rubber meets the road and they've messed up yet again, and you're on your 57th correction of the day, you're in the loop. You're in that loop.
Yeah.
And you're so right. It's like, what is, and I call them the trigger protocols or security systems. Like that's what I could.
Mhm.
So what is your trigger protocol for you and your child
Mhm.
so that they know how to step away from the conflict and de-escalate, and you know how you're going to step away from the conflict and de-escalate so that you can come back together and say, all right, we can solve this problem because we're both really creative and we can do this.
Mhm.
But
Well, and Becky, one of the things that I think is important, whether I'm talking with parents of adult children or parents of the population that you're addressing, is that the best gift that we give our children is a healthy version of ourselves.
yeah.
And when we can't self-regulate, or when aren't we aren't peaceful within us, then we can't give them something we don't have. And I think too often, one of the big mistakes in parenting has been we have poured out, poured out, poured out, poured out. And then we wonder why we don't have anything left. And it's because we've not understood that they really, one of their greatest needs, whether it's 4 or 44, is for us to have this incredible sense of self-security where we are grounded, we are regulated, and we are a peaceful presence that regardless of what's going on inside their brain, their bodies, their lives, that when they see us walk in the room, there's this immediate exhale that says it's going to be okay.
Mm.
And if we can't be that, what happens is we end up joining them in the chaos. And then
So
nobody
often. Yeah.
nobody wins. Everybody loses the minute we are no longer that grounding place for them to quote align themselves to and with. And the more we get escalated, the more it escalates them. because it just says, this is important. I need to pay attention. Oh my goodness. So they kind of go crazy in their little world while we're going crazy in our little world. And now we got a big batch of crazy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right. And it's
Yes.
like, and then everybody's exhausted. Like, what just happened?
Mhm.
And it's, and that's when things get said that we wish we didn't say.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. You talk a lot about reframing. And I love that that is, I think that's the core foundation of my program, as well as learning the actual skills to be able to have that grounded presence, because we are not born with knowing how to do that. These are all skills. And I will say skills, not just like, okay, I'm going to adopt these skills and these are now my skills. These are skills we have to repeatedly practice and
Yep.
experience the same frustrating moment and show up in a different way. And that's
Right.
how we build those reps. It's not like I'm deciding today that, I'm always going to remain calm and I'm never going to yell again. That just sets everybody up for failure. But,
Right.
I also like to include my kids and say, I'm also human and working on this. And
Oh yeah.
I'm not nailing this 100% of the time. And when we talk about how I'm sorry is like it's such a inaccurate. I'm sorry. I hate the I'm sorry, because it either says you have to say okay, or, just like somehow that's supposed to be the period at the end of the sentence. But it's like we prove our sorries by changing how we acted the next time. Like we continue to act on, yes, you can say the sorry, that's fine, but we don't actually the sorry doesn't take into effect until you show us that you are sorry by adjusting in the same situation the next time.
Right.
And so you do talk about these reframes. Can you share some practical examples of how you would kind of reframe these high pressure situations with your kids, and what that looks like for parents to have a tangible example?
So for instance, let's say you have a kid who's having a temper tantrum, or having, like, he's really angry about something, right? Then I would pay very close attention to my body language, my voice. I would start talking in very soft tones, and I would say to them, I can see you're in a lot of pain. Can you tell me what that's about?
Mm-hmm.
And just let there be silence, and let them, swirl around, and just say,
You'll
I'm
get
so
that, I hate you, I don't want to talk, I don't want. Yeah, you'll get all that.
I'll
That's
get all of that.
expected.
Right. That's going to happen. Just say, I hear that. I hear you're upset, but let's, show me where on your body that you're feeling this. And I try to get them to actually point to a place. Sometimes they'll go to their heart. Sometimes they'll go to their stomach. Sometimes they'll clench their fit. They'll do all those different things. And just say, so what if you have a fist? What would your fist say to you? Get them to try to project onto a body part what it is that it's saying. Because what it does when you start asking somebody questions, it immediately begins to shift the brain from the emotional section to the thinking section. And the more we can ask the questions, the more the anxiety starts to lower. Then we can start to de-escalate. But the questions are our best gift, because that way, in that situation, they have to start thinking after they've done their meltdown a little bit. They have to start thinking, how am I going to answer this question? But it's extremely important that we're also paying attention to, what is it that I need to be observing? What is it that happened beforehand? What is it that happened that, what's the pattern here? And, like, you're the expert on the ADHD strong-willed area. So you know this far better than I do, because I'm a little bit more removed from that. What I would say is that humans need to be seen and heard before they can then make better choices and better decisions. And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
especially when we get to adolescence. I used to, in one of my other lives, I worked with kids who were in trouble. And one of the things they would say to me is, I just wanted someone to listen to me. They don't have to agree, but I needed them to listen why I did what I did.
Mhm.
And I think that's the shape of the world that we've got to really ask them, do you feel like I heard you? Do you feel like I really listened? Because if they feel like we really understand, then they're more likely to take their the consequences with a greater sense of ease and a greater sense of they respected me to listen to me, because respect is the key issue here. When we don't listen and we think we know and we don't check it out, we're really being disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a pillar, a foundational pillar in developing a healthy adult, is making sure that whatever age they are, that we are demonstrating respect. And when we don't demonstrate respect because we're done, we've had it or whatever, it's important that we own that and just say, you know what, you deserve for me to respect you this way. How I spoke to you like that was not okay. And I'm sorry for that. I think that kind of a give and take, they begin to notice, they begin to pay attention. And so depending on where they are developmentally, right, is key. But I think we have to be really grounded that I believe that there are 4 pillars to raising a healthy emotional human being. The first one is respect. The second one is, do I know them? And do I really know them? Do I know like their tendencies? Do I know their vulnerabilities? Do I pay attention to who they're becoming? Right. The third is, do they feel accepted by me? And this is where children who have ADHD or strong wills, a lot of times they struggle with feeling truly accepted.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a big, big, big issue. So sometimes I would ask them, so what would acceptance look like for you? How would you know that I have totally accepted you? Because I may be thinking I'm working really hard at making them feel accepted, but it may not be hitting them where they need to feel accepted. So I think sometimes we need to include them in the conversation, how that gets defined. And then I think the fourth thing is, what does it really mean to unconditionally love them? That doesn't mean they get a pass on bad behavior. I'm not talking about that. But what does unconditional love look like and mean to them? And I think when we start that conversation, when they're in their, between 6 and 10, and then we can keep carrying it all the way up through adolescence, we're not going to have the issues when we get to adulthood, because we've laid the foundation in the hard moments by having those hard conversations. When we get to adulthood, there isn't going to be anything really hard, because they will know that they were truly unconditionally loved, they were truly accepted, they were truly known, and they were respected.
Yeah.
Well,
I
now,
think those are so key, and there's a couple things swirling in my mind right now, but like one of them is like the way that I feel respected and therefore give respect might not be the same.
right,
And so I think a lot of us are just kind of still, we're in that like directing, puppeteering section of life. And it's a lot of people are like, well, isn't this too early to have those kind of conversations with them? And, what I am constantly teaching and advocating for is bringing your child into the conversation
yes,
so early. I call them mini board meetings. We bring props in. There's things
right,
like we create the environment. The goal here in all of these board meetings that we find is like we're all working towards something as a unit, right? We're all
right,
agreeing that this is a challenge that we're all experiencing. This is the way I feel it. This is the way you feel it. What are the obstacles that we are, butting up against so that we can't actually achieve this? And then also, what can we all get on board with? Like, what lights us up? How can we pivot? What can we
right,
test? And what I like to do is view the results as data before I view it as like an emotional attack,
yeah,
because it's like if I can see, that didn't work because, oh, we didn't address this obstacle, or we didn't actually have a security protocol in place. We didn't know what we were going to do when we got triggered. So none of those were in place. So the data was off, right? The
right,
experiment didn't go well. But I think it's really important to bring our kids into the conversations earlier and earlier, because we can think that we're doing what is best
yes,
for them and it's not matching. So we're speaking two different languages. And so they truly don't feel like they're understood. We feel all wounded because we're literally giving it
yeah,
150%,
yeah,
but it's
that's
not
right.
the right place.
No,
Yeah.
you've captured parents of adult children as well. They have great intentions. They're giving it their all. They've given, 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 and it's like they're helping. And but what they don't understand is that in their attempt to help, they're actually insulting,
Mm,
because it's basically that it gets translated out of their mouths and into the adult child's brain. I don't think you're smart enough to figure this out on your own, so I have to do it for you.
yep.
Not the intention of the parent, but boy,
No.
that's how it lands on the child. And that can happen at various stages of life. It can happen if we don't check things out to see what's
Mhm.
really happening here. You know,
Yeah.
I tell this story with my son. I decided to homeschool him in third grade for several different reasons. And I'm not a homeschool mom. I was not the homeschool kind, but circumstances forced this issue. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. But I noticed that he wasn't like obeying and agreeing and listening. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 not in this household. There's no way this is okay. You're not, there's no way you're not going to listen to me. Right. I'm like,
Huh.
what happened here? So I looked at him one day. I was really upset. And I looked at him and I said, you better pray you're deaf, because if you're not, you're in deep doo doo. I was so annoyed.
Oh yeah, we've all
Like,
said we've all been
so,
there.
so I dragged his butt to the audiologist. And sure enough, he had an auditory processing disorder.
Oh my gosh. You're like, dang it.
I'm like, oh, how many times has this poor kid gotten in trouble for not obeying when he didn't hear and he didn't know that he didn't hear?
Mm,
Because he had a really bad case of it. So if there was background noise like a TV or a fan or any other kind of noise moving around, it would interfere and he might get 3 out of 10 words. Well, then
mm,
he would respond something stupid or ridiculous and like, he's not taking me seriously. And then I'd be annoyed, right?
right.
Only to find out that the poor kid couldn't hear. And I'm
Mm.
like, and I was like, what other things in my life have I assumed were working or that we were on the same page with that are not, and we weren't?
Yes. I think that's so critical. And like, for the person who's like, well, my child can hear, I've done the test. There is typically an obstacle. There is typically an obstacle
Right.
because they do not want to just they rely on us that it's like a biological we are their source of care and survival. So on its biological fundamental attachment, all the
Right.
things level, they don't want to fall out of favor with us.
No, they do
So
not.
we have to figure out what that obstacle is. And oftentimes it's the way in which we are approaching the situation with
Yes.
our assumptions and our beliefs about their choices and behaviors. Something I've actually started doing before I assume, um, based off previous data that I have collected from my child, that he's typically doing it in this way. I'm like, what are 2 other options that could be true for him? I'm trying really hard to sit in the moment and be like, yeah, I'm frustrated. Of course you're frustrated. That's a really annoying situation. Not telling myself I have to shove it down. I can't be frustrated. I can't be mad. I have to have
Right.
this faux presentation of calm.
Yep.
Like I can show annoyance and I can say I'm annoyed and I'm going to self-regulate for a sec before I say anything. Like
Right.
that's fine. Um, but before I make an evaluation or start to speak, I'm really spending that intentional time saying, what are 2 options that actually could be truer? And what's hilarious is he's like, yeah, I thought about it and I wanted to go do that thing. And he wasn't thinking that's outside of mom's like boundary of blah, blah, blah. He was
Right.
thinking that sticker was really rad and I wanted to put it on the Lego, but I pulled the whole thing off. And so instead of putting it on the Lego and putting it back on the thing, I put it on the ground. And then I realized, oh, it's
Yeah.
on the ground and I can't get these stickers off the ground. So I'm just going to like leave them there and hopefully, and I'm like, we're like, what are you thinking putting stickers on the hardwood floor? And he's like, legitimately wasn't thinking.
Right.
But we have the evaluation so fast that like you intended to screw up something you intended because there's just so many moments of correction.
Right.
So
Well, and I
when
think,
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think part of what you bring up there is their motive. I think when we assume the worst of their motive, when it wasn't, there was no motive involved in trying, I want to make her mad, so I'm going to put these on the floor. None of that ever came across his mind, right?
Yeah.
Now, the side effect is it's still a problem. It's still going to have to be addressed and cleaned and all that stuff. But I think that's when they get really wounded by us, is when we sometimes make assumptions about the motive behind what they do. That's when they get wounded.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we have to be careful, because when we wound them because of our assumptions about them that are not true, that's when it starts to, quote, send internal messages to them of their value and their lack of worth. And then that's when we start to see, well, how do they make up for that when they get among their peers to feel like they are worthy? And that's when we
Yes.
start to lose our impact in their lives, because they don't want to, every time they see their parents, think, oh, they just think I'm a loser, so I'm just going to act like a loser.
Mhm.
And boy, that carries on to adulthood, you know. And so, you know, for some of us who were blessed to have challenging children, you know, I have always believed that there was something I was supposed to learn, which is one of the reasons I got this good, was I was supposed to learn something about me, about who I am, about what I needed to work on. And I was given this particular type of child that was going to bring me to the end of myself, to teach me some things I needed to learn that I probably would not have learned other than being the parent to this child.
Amen to that. I think the lesson that I am meant to learn is I truly cannot control everything. Like
Uh,
that is something that, with the death of my son, I learned very quickly, oh, you can't control that. But then I went, I swung very aggressively just for the sake of any sort of sanity, swung into controlling a lot of aspects of my ADHD son's life. And learning and relearning how to give him the control and power and autonomy that he so desperately craves, as well as, wrapping it in all of the, very helpful things, but relinquishing control. Oh man, that's a tough one. That is a
well,
huge, and I keep running into the fire to learn that lesson again
right.
and again.
Well, and it really is an illusion, right? Because
Yeah.
the truth is, it doesn't really exist.
And
But
they're going to do
boy,
whatever they want to do anyways,
and
and
they're
we
going to
can't
do whatever
control
they
it.
want to do anyway, right? And I
Yep.
have, I would say at the age where I am now with mine, my 41-year-old, I am finally broken of having any sense of control with him at all, ever, 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 ever. And it's very freeing in some ways, because I don't feel responsible for anything, right?
Right.
Anything. But I think because we have lived in a culture, and it's an interesting statistic that 71% of parents think that how their children turn out is a reflection on them,
Mm.
that this is the reason why they're all up in everybody's business, is because if they don't turn out well, everybody will think they were lousy parents. And it's about their self-worth. It's about their sense of value. And so it can be really messy, really, really
Oh yeah.
messy, right? So the
Oh yeah.
sooner we can come to this reality that we really have no control except over ourselves, it really saves us a lot of aggravation, a lot of pain, and a lot of suffering. But it takes a
Yes.
while for us to learn it.
It does. And we have to have so many skills of like
Oh yeah.
regulating and repairing and all of that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
final question, because I know there's so many listeners right now who are just like, "Ugh, this is me. I'm in the loop. I can't stop correcting. I truly do believe my son feels like or my daughter feels like they are the bad kid, like that. I can't measure up to mom or dad. I'm never right. I'm always
Mhm.
wrong." What advice would you give to parents to start reconnecting and start tapping in to learning about your child and showing them that you are in fact becoming the trusted place for them to land?
Mhm. I think the sooner that parents can articulate and identify the expectations that they have of their children, regardless of what age that they have, because we don't typically even have awareness that we have them. And when we don't have awareness that we have them, they leak out on our kids. and our kids feel them, they react to them, and they decide what it means about the relationship based upon them. And we drag them through life, through every stage, and it does damage, and then we're wondering what's wrong, right? And so I think the first thing I encourage parents to do is I want you to really have an honest conversation. And if you have a spouse, ask that spouse, what are the expectations that we have? Now, remember, when you're in the formative years of raising them, you want to, quote, instill values, right? You want to instill a sense of right or wrong. You want to instill kindness, compassion, empathy. Those are values that you want them to be character qualities, right? But expectations, I'll give you a quick example that hit me on the head. Um, I was at a wedding with one of my sons, attending the wedding of one of my son's best friends, and it came time for the mother-son dance. And Lee, my friend, had picked the song that I would pick if it was going to be Taylor and myself. And as they start to dance, I start to cry. And I start to ask myself, what is this about? And it was the awareness that I knew on some level I would never have a mother-son dance with Taylor. And the reason would be is because he always dated international women who would have international customs and traditions, that there was a shot that moment would never happen in my world. I grew up in a minister's home. I had attended probably 200 weddings by the time I hit 18.
Same.
And so after that, I married a minister. So I was wedding directing for him at a lot of different things over the years. So my compilation is of an American wedding. And I realized in that moment that probably won't be happening. And so I gave myself permission to grieve because that was my expectation for his wedding. And I was like, let it go, Kath. Release him of your expectation of this. He doesn't need this. He doesn't deserve it. This is about you. So you need to let it go. So I did in that moment. Well, fast forward 4 years, I get a call, and he says, hey, Mom, I'm getting married in 60 days. And would you come to the wedding? He lives in Singapore and the wedding's in Malaysia, right?
Amazing. Yep.
There's no American tradition of any kind because I am the only American citizen showing up for the wedding.
Oh my gosh. Yep.
Right. So I get there. I have a week with her family and had a great time. It was a wonderful week. And I just remember thinking, I didn't even think about that mother-son dance at all because I was so focused. First of all, I had grieved the expectation that I'd always had. I had let that go. And so I could be fully present to receive everything else that was going to come my way, that filled my tank, that made it a very special time with my son. So I didn't have any baggage to have to, quote, muddle through in the middle of what was happening because I was aware of the expectation.
Yes.
And I
Oh
just
my
think
God.
we have so many of them that we don't know that we have, that actually creep into the relationship. So make the list of your expectations. Find out the ones that trigger you emotionally in some way, shape, or form. If those don't get met, ask yourself the hard questions. Do your work around what this means to you, and figure out a way to heal for yourself as an adult and as a parent, so that way you get to then embrace what their dreams and their expectations for their life are, and not them having to figure out how to manage ours, or having to choose between our expectations versus their dreams for their life. That's a horrible place to put a young adult in, is
Yeah.
having to pick between making my parents happy versus making myself happy. So
Wow.
I just think I always keep going back. I have to look at what is it that I have the power to do. And I have the power to work on me. I have the power to pay attention to how I show up, how I feel, how I communicate. What's my attitude? What's my expectation of good things? Can I bring good expectations to the relationship, right? Can I believe the best in them when they can't believe the best in themselves? So
Yeah.
those are the things that I think of.
I love that. That's actually one of the key parts of my, whenever anybody joins my program, we track patterns. I think it's really important to track the patterns so we know what we're actually working against, you know?
Yep.
And one of the key questions is, what were your expectations in this moment? Because we don't even think about it
Nope.
sometimes. And like, I had an issue with my son yesterday, and I was like, wow, my expectations were far greater than his skill set. And that's why there was an explosion, because
Yeah.
he couldn't measure up with the skills and the tools he had to the expectation that didn't match the moment.
Right.
And so then I could check myself and be like, okay, mourn that loss of the moment, grieve that experience, exactly what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and then circle back around and own it. First of all,
Right.
own,
Right. Own
this
it.
was my bad. I had way too high of expectations. And then here's what I can do next. Here's how I can show up differently the next time, and really actually commit to doing that. I think that's the most beautiful part, is when you continue to prove, when I say I'm going to do something for the betterment of this relationship, I'm going to.
Hmm.
And that builds such a foundation, because they're seeing it. And as they're developing through mirror neurons and all the beautiful things, they're like, oh, when you say something, you can actually do it. It's not, oh,
Yeah.
say it and then just live your life the way you want.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really powerful. And I wish you had been around years ago, because I could have sent a million people to you because, you know, you speak so clearly about how we have to stay really present in the moment. We just can't keep, you know, applying this and saying, okay, that's just the way it is. It's like, no, we have to keep evolving. We have to keep growing. And what you just shared is a beautiful example of your development and, evolving while he's also doing it. And
Yeah.
I think parents, regardless of what age we are, we need to keep recognizing that until the very last breath of our body, we have a responsibility to really keep unfolding, keep growing, keep asking those questions, because we brought them into the world, and I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we don't quit.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I feel really strong about that. We can't quit.
Oh, I love this. I love this conversation. It doesn't really matter what stage you are. We continue to be reminded that we have choice in how we show up. We have choice every
Yes.
single day. We have choice every single day in how we respond. And, even if you feel like you are just at the lowest, you've hit the bottom, it's like
Yeah.
we can still make one step in the direction of, building a new foundation, starting again. There's just so many, the relationship is so important. And I think if we continue to prove time and time again that we're going to continue to show up, and we're going to continue to practice, and we're going to own our stuff, and we're going to try again, that models resilience, because we're
Yes.
showing our kids, like, even adults mess up. Like, if we constantly hold the bar of perfection, they're gonna be like, this is
Yeah.
impossible. So, like, showing your messy mistakes and then being like, all right, well, that didn't go smoothly, and I'm
Yep.
sorry about that, and here's how I plan on doing it next. I just think there's a lot of power in that. And then we're not against each other, we're on the same team against the problem.
And that right there speaks volumes, because the I had a 65-year-old in my office, and he'd come in because his wife was depressed. And so I was just asking if I could meet with him just to kind of get a sense of him. And he said, um, can you answer a question for me? And I said, yes. He said, I've spent my last 40 years working in the family business trying to make my mom and dad love me.
Ugh,
And these tears
so
just
sad.
began to fall down his face. And he'd worked so hard. And he was someone who had had ADHD long before they knew how to even help him. And he had worked to try to overcome and figure things out. And he'd worked so hard, but his parents were still living. And he's like, I still have no idea what it's going to take for me to truly know that they love me. And I
Mm.
thought, we have to realize we carry so much power in their lives forever. And that's a sacred privilege that we've been given, to have that kind of influence and um, opportunity to love well. And I get some kids are really hard. I get it. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think the real question is, what am I going to leave them with?
Yeah.
And that's on me.
Even if that's what you're holding on to, like, it's, you're in that moment, and that the word vomit is quite literally at your throat. It's
Yeah.
like, I think just saying that sacred responsibility is so that I started welling up with tears, because it's like,
Mm.
we all know those moments where you're like, oh, I wish I didn't say that, or I wish I didn't
Yeah.
do it like that. And yeah, we can't reverse time, but we can intentionally move forward in a different direction. And I just think that intentionality is so critical, especially with these really fragile, strong-willed kids who are trying so desperately to, on the surface, they might be like, screw you, I don't really care, but they
Right.
care so much,
Yeah.
probably more so than they'll ever let on.
Oh, yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's really important. Well, where can people find you? I know you have an upcoming book, which is really exciting. It's coming out this
Yes.
year. So where can people pick it up? Where can people pre-order it?
So, it's gonna be on you can get it pre-ordered at the end of the month, but, I have a website called parentingadultchildrentoday.com, and so you can find me on Instagram and TikTok and all those places, and the name of the book will be called It's Never Too Late to Be a Great Parent, and so that will be the book, that'll be released in August, so I'm excited.
Yay! Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Well, thank you for such a beautiful, insightful conversation. I'm sure many people are walking away with a restored hope that, you know what, even though I've messed up, I still have so many opportunities to
Mhm.
really right the ship and just engage them in a conversation about what we both need and want from this
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that, just that conversation, and even if that your child's like, I don't want to talk to you, a letter, opening it up with a letter, owning your part and saying like, I know these were the choices I made. I know this is what I said. And here's how I plan on showing up in the future. And, my son's 9, but for the last year, his favorite way of communicating is in a journal back and forth. And it
Mhm.
gives us space and time to be able to like have the conversation that we want to have. And so there's many ways to re-enter this
There
conversation.
is, and I love the idea. The journaling allows people to step back and pause and really put their thoughts together versus the immediacy of technology has really hurt that. And
Yes.
and that lack of learning the delayed gratification often is the thing that gets us in trouble when we push the button we shouldn't. So I love that idea and I hope you keep it up forever. So that would be
Oh,
great.
yeah. Yes, me too. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. And everybody, go ahead and grab her book. We all know that it's going to be helpful, even if we are, parenting teenagers or, any time we're future tripping, right? We got to have this information ahead of time. So thank you so much for being here. And
Thank you.
everybody, I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Responsible Parenting Podcast. If you like what you heard, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. If you know someone who would benefit from this podcast, I'd be honored if you'd share this episode with them. Until next time, know that you are enough, you are capable, you've made it through all of your hardest days, and we will keep growing on this parenting journey together. This podcast was produced by Kim Kelty and myself, Becky Jennings, and edited by the Kelty Method, Branding and Podcasting.